What is up, generals? We are back with Ultimate General Civil War. We're on the Union Major General Let's Play, and this is the camp for the army before the Battle of Chickamauga. As you can see, I have dumped a lot of things into 3rd and 4th Corps as they don't get to show up in the course of the fight, and I've deviated again from the new model army, so to speak, to kind of beef up on the forces I feel like I'm going to be using at Chickamauga. This is a battle I've also not played since my last major playthrough, which wasn't on YouTube and was at the embarrassing Colonel level, which is just a completely different game, but I do remember it being a very forested map, and a big one too. So here we're taking a look at some of the messages after the Bayou Forge fight. The Confederate Army is, call it 57,000-ish, and their training has gone up quite a bit. So let's call it that, like 70%, give or take. The armory, however, is still hovering around the mid-50s. So I don't know what I'm doing or not doing to affect the armory negatively, but not affect the training. And then their numbers have been hovering in the mid-50s for a while. And that's probably a direct result of the size of my army, I'm guessing. But we'll see. So, Chickamauga. This is a fight that happens in Tennessee. I've actually been to the battlefield. It's gorgeous. But I don't know much about the battle. I would imagine this is part of the Western campaign. And I don't remember if this is part of Sherman's March to the Sea or not. It certainly seems like it would be, but who knows? Put first and, well, I mean, Wikipedia or Google or literally any historian would know, but I don't know, which I'll be Googling after all this is over. We drop 1st and 2nd Corps as the vanguard force and then the 2nd force. However, in the early phase of the battle, you have this weird kind of holding action. You have to fight with this brigade that appears to be entirely drawn from Illinois. And what's super nifty is every soldier in the brigade has a Spencer repeater rifle, although I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now what we're doing is we're talking about the general flow of the battlefield, which gives you kind of this is actually a really great opener. I really think they do a good job of explaining the import of a lot of the landmarks on the battlefield and like why they matter and where they're coming from and where your guys are and all that kind of stuff. They do a great job with that. Hey, if we lose this or we lose that, or they have a chance to get here, that's going to be bad for us for these reasons, basically. So yeah, here we come to the holding action. So you start up top with some skirmishers and like a battery of Jameses, and then down here you've got 3 or 4 regiments and another battery of Jameses. And this might not be like the optimal way to do this, but I really dislike this part of the battle. I'm not good at it, and just to do it right, you need to do a lot of like perfect micromanagement, and then I don't know. So the flag up here doesn't really matter. The flag down there doesn't really matter. As far as I can tell, what you do in this part of the fight doesn't really matter. So I'm just trying to preserve as much of the force as I can, because they don't show up tomorrow. They're not part of your fight over the course of the rest of the battle. They're just here for this one thing. And while I've been rambling here incoherently, so this is not part of Sherman's March to the Sea. This particular army is under the Battle of the Army of the Cumberland under General Rosecrans, and so it's unrelated to that particular endeavor. Yeah, so what I do with this phase of the fight is, instead of manning those trenches, what I do is I pull back to the woods here and I make a fortress. Now that does basically cede control of the bridge, and that's obviously not ideal. And I'm watching this and I kind of think, like, what if what if I took the position that I'm taking right now, but instead of doing this kind of like L shape or J shape that I've got going on, what if I just made a line so that one unit, and only one unit, unfortunately, would be free to blast obliquely. So there's skirmishers right there on that recon point. What if I put a brigade there, or a little lower, and they could still shoot at the bridge and do all that kind of stuff. The reason I pull back here is that 2 or maybe 3 units of cavalry come in and try and harry my back line, and then they really distract the people who are defending that line of trenches, and pull the fire in 2 different directions. And it's just kind of hard to maintain anything approaching a front line. So I want to pull back into these woods, and I want to maintain a front line. And they come screaming across this bridge, pour a volley into my skirmishers, which, sucks for the skirmishers, but is great for the army because the skirmishers take a lot less damage than anybody else. And then this unit here just gets absolutely hammered. So I've never tried pulling back, like this on this position. I usually try and fight it out at the bridge or something else. This is kind of a new idea I wanted to try for Major General. Again, I kind of respected the AI more, and I thought, well, holding the bridge is a good idea and all, but if I give them the bridge, but then they can't go any further inland than the bridge, what have I really lost? And what I've gained is a defensible front line. So when the cavalry inevitably shows up, they're going to bounce into formed infantry in cover, blah, blah, blah. The usual defensive nonsense that I've been going off for the entire campaign. And then essentially what I want to do is, you kind of see the position I'm developing right now, is I want to give myself the closest thing I possibly can to a safe position to operate in. And especially once these 2 units of cavalry get down here, which they're on their way down now, I have the ability to do that. Now, I don't know if from what I can tell, it doesn't matter. The flag up top doesn't seem to matter. But what works out really well about this position down here is now I've got a lot of forces concentrated in a small area. I've got 2 units of artillery able to just kind of really punish the Confederates if they try and engage in melee. And I've got these brigades of infantry who, to their credit, are armed with Spencer carbines and are really able to output a truly stupid amount of firepower. However, the problem I run into in this particular scenario, and one that I would imagine did probably happen for units historically fielding a Spencer, is, oh man, I churn through ammo like you would not believe. And these brigades are all basically running on empty in no time flat, and they have to hold this position for a very long time. But what does work out really well is I think we shatter like 2 units of Confederates or something. And yeah, sure, they get the bridge. Okay, that sucks, whatever. But their cavalry is never really a major concern. Later on in the course of this particular engagement, when the map opens up to a wider frontage, there are other places where they can cross that I can't quite defend my entire front, and so the position that I'm in right now kind of ends up turning into, I don't know how to put this, but like it ends up turning into a bubble. It's not even a salient to be pinched off, but like literally an encircled bubble where I'm just in there. In this sort of oval, shooting at Confederates in every direction. Like I said, we do shatter a unit or 2. We do, do very well in terms of everything. But once the supplies run out, things start to go downhill real quick. So, yeah, that part's not great. And obviously, just abandoning that northern bridge is also probably an ahistorical move. Historically, I'm sure holding that bridge would have been a requirement or something, but Yeah, no, we do okay here. This position's actually all right. It's hard for them to approach. Now, a combination of factors make it hard for the Confederates to approach the position. One is the AI is far more a fan of like limited attacks with one or two brigades, rather than what I would do, which is to say line up all three of these, pick that the 92nd in the middle there, and just charge right on in. But hey, it is what it is. So at the moment now, I become aware of Culpeper, and as a result, likely also the two brigades of infantry he comes with. Yep, there's one of them, who had been marching from the northern pass. I become aware of them now, and I relocate my cav, my dismounted cav, to see if they can't get some shots on Culpeper, or just make crossing the river expensive or hard for the Confederates at this level. However, I say river, and it's more like it's a shallow creek, because there's plenty of places they could cross, and they're not required to do so via a road or via any kind of like crossing. And what that ultimately breaks down to is there's not like a clean way for me to bottle them into approaching my position from a certain direction, and I don't have the men to cast a recon net over the whole of the north-facing position of my line against this creek to make sure that I don't, like, I can see them when and if they cross. End result is we skirmish for a bit, trying to make sure that if they do try and cross, it gets expensive, but ultimately they cross, and they threaten this position from enough different angles that obviously it's a little messy. However, we really bloody the noses of these Confederates trying to take the Alexander's Bridge to the south. We trade very effectively, given that we're using the heavy trees and everything else to hide in. But again, it's not enough supplies. Eventually I run out, and the rate of fire drops off rather quickly. I don't know if there's any other kind of like stat that drops when they lose ammunition, like if they have an efficiency debuff, or if they have a, an accuracy debuff or something too. I don't have that data, but my perception is that units that don't have any ammunition fire slower, and I think they also fire less effectively, but that, I don't know if that's just me being like my perception versus reality. I couldn't tell you. But we make sure to keep Culpeper's battery to the north here morale shocked and eventually wiped. But what in the moment when I'm playing I miss is that there are two brigades of infantry up there too, that I've lost eyes on. I don't know where they are, and where they likely are is they're flanking my position to the west of. Well, assuming the game, the top of the screen is north, then to the west of the Union position, they are outflanking me. So then we have all of this going on to the south, and that's just elements of I Corps getting into position, 6 brigades and a battery plus McClellan. So I think probably most of 1st Division, and then like under half of 2nd Division are getting into position. And there's going to be kind of a weak Confederate attack to try and cross the river. I position some of my guys not great, and they get shot at from the other side of the river, and I lose a commander just stupidly not paying attention, basically. Otherwise, though, yeah, like the southern crossings are never really under any kind of serious threat. So, yeah, that's the setup for the battle. I know when I do these, I tend to talk pretty aggressively early on, and then I get a little winded, and I'm like, like this is just giving you guys a play-by-play is not really any good. Like, let me tell you about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So the south is fine. They're not going to cross these bridges. Unless I come to these particular crossings with like not nearly enough men, or I'm an idiot in terms of how I put my guys around or something. There's just no chance they're gonna. Yeah, so there's one that got wiped. There's no chance they're gonna take those bridges. But my thought process in the north is, I wanted to collapse my entire command into one position and fight a defensive battle instead of trying to hold way up north and then at this crossing too with two commands who were too small for the task. Now, I imagine it's possible, especially if you can somehow keep the cavalry busy to hold this bridge more or less indefinitely. But I'm not sure how to do it, and I'm not good at the micro aspect. And from what I could tell, it didn't really matter, which is to say holding the bridge up top or whatever, holding Alexander's bridge, which I think I do ultimately retake it. Any of these actions don't really matter in the grand scheme of the Battle of Chickamauga. So why? I don't get to keep these units. I think that the kills I inflict here do continue to affect the rest of the battle, obviously, but that's about it. So in that regard, let's do what killing we can do, but otherwise, don't worry about it. And that's basically what I'm doing. Is I'm punishing the Confederate cavalry for being in range of my rifles. I've got the skirmisher cav moving up there to take that flag. They're not intended to hold it under from concerted attackers or anything. I don't care about that. They're there to recapture the flag, or at least put it under Union control temporarily. And when you do that, the AI loses their mind and comes at you, and that's perfect. So that's all I really want to do, is I want to get the AI thinking about me and coming at me across the bridge, because as far as I'm concerned now, they've kind of blown their wad insofar as they've attacked me from enough different directions that I kind of have a good idea of where their forces are. That said, I have seeded in the north the good terrain, which is a shame, because that position's a great defensive position. But if they, this is what I'm seeing is they're coming to get me. And you look at Klein, the cav unit, his ammo count is just atrocious, and these Spencer carbines, these guys aren't carrying nearly enough ammunition to keep up this fight without any kind of supply wagon or something. And we just don't have any. I don't have any means of getting a supply wagon to them, because at the moment I don't have a supply wagon. So these guys are shooting with no ammunition, and so I'll get to that in a second. But you'll see. Oh, geez. Yeah, the fighting on the southernmost crossing is going great. The 25th Infantry is getting shot at by Ector, and I don't catch it soon enough, and I lose an officer. I don't know. I don't think it's happened yet, but I will sooner or later here lose the officer. So now those two brigades who would have been crossing up north and fighting me up there, they're now crossing down here, trying to fight me down here. So there's the officer getting. It's just dumb. It's just dumb play on my part. Just a simple thing that I missed. The fighting actually in the north here with the detached skirmishers and the dismounted cavalry and whatnot, it actually goes pretty well for a while. And that's, I think, probably the power of the Spencer carbine is even a unit that's got low ammo seems to perform well versus a muzzle reloaded weapon. So we get a guy to come charging into me. He's been running the entire time, running across the bridge and everything else. So he's tired. At the same time as Fulton and McNair try and press their attack. And so I'm actually nervous at this point. When I'm playing this, I'm like, I have to hold this for 38 more minutes. This is going to be rough. That kind of thing. Wipe the cannons, which is good, but then Macklemore's Cav comes and tries to fight with Minty, who does admittedly outnumber and outgun him, so there's that at least, but still. These guys trying to cross the river are never going to get anywhere. The whole thing in the south is fine. And if I thought I could get them over there, I would probably detach like 2 brigades of my infantry to go support this position in the middle. But anyway. All right. So 25th, having taken all kinds of shots from across the river, I just decided, all right, let's get you out of Dodge. 2 brigades is enough to hold that bridge for eternity. I could probably do it with 1, frankly, and I pull him back. Now I've got my command surrounded on basically every side. My command surrounded basically on every side, engaged in firefights of either favorable or unfavorable terms, by which I mean, they're in cover shooting at someone who's not, or they're in cover shooting at someone who is basically where I'm going to break that down. Fortunately, we get some really great shots on Grig as he's crossing the river, and we get a couple of opportunities like that keep their offensive from really getting off the ground. Does that make sense? So they probably could overwhelm me with these attacks coming from my left flank. They've got that 1 or 2 big units of cavalry somewhere in the vicinity of like 400 men. So one's like 300 and one's 500. We'll just split the difference. And then they've got 2 brigades of pretty good infantry in Fulton and Gregg. Yeah. And then I guess another one in the middle there. So 3 brigades of infantry, along with the remnants of their bridge crossing force, which is to say that 1 skirmisher unit and then like 2 understrength brigades of infantry who've just been not wiped, but shot to shit and back. They could probably overwhelm me, but fortunately they keep on attacking in this kind of pell-mell fashion. So 1 here, 1 there, that kind of thing. And we're able to focus our fire even though everyone's out of ammo. We're able to more or less, not perfectly, but more or less, focus our fire in such a way that each thrust can be countered and thrown back independently of the one about to come next. And so they go and they route and they take a minute to collect their breath, and then they come back for another one, and rinse, wash, repeat, so forth and so on, and that kind of thing. But it's still a rough go of it in this part of the fight. But ultimately, it would appear as if holding the bridges doesn't really matter. I mean, it might make some of this a little easier if you're better at the micro than I am, and especially if you're better at the micro portion that involves fighting off the cav coming into your rear. So if someone has an idea about the best practice with regard to that part, I'm all ears, because man, I don't know if it's just because I suck at the micro or what, but I'm not good at that part. Anyway, so we go to the camp screen. Confederates 51,000 to the Union 50, I think 2,000 or something. Replace some officers and I bump some men up back to their fighting strength. And that's basically it. We just get the army ready to fight again and sort of, as best as possible, undo some of the damage from day one. Minimal though it may be, get ourselves back up there and ready for day two. Top units off, especially artillery where needed. And then I don't know why I didn't get, or no, this is topping the men off. Okay. I thought this was like a unit I'd missed or something in Second Corps, but no, this is just me topping those units off. I like this whole using green recruits until you either hit the cap or one more green recruit would screw your star up, and it gets you these kind of wonky numbers, which to me feels more historical than like perfect 1500s. I don't think any battle ever like you had perfect numbers. All right, so anyway, we move into like the meat of the battle now, which is day two. And I think this is a really cool fight. I think that this like I'm not really a fan of the opener on this battle because you don't get to keep anything at all from that battle, so why did you fight it? It's not your troops, it's not your army, it's not your soldiers, and it's not your guns. So I guess maybe you get to keep the guns, but anyway, yeah. So in much the same way that the early part of the battle was about keeping my force together, it's about the same thing here, keeping the rather disparate elements that you get collected together and trying to, when possible, keep them collected into a more coherent whole, and then essentially just kind of denying larger and larger portions of the map to the Confederate AI. So right now they have nearly complete control of the map, and as we get more and more of our forces online, the objective is to kind of squeeze them all around, because this is a big fight or big map, and if you do it right, you can get to some nice defensive terrain early, hold it, and then they're in this position where they're basically just kind of smashing themselves into some defensive terrain. So here you have the remainder of 1st Division and parts of 2nd Division coming online. And all I'm trying to do is collapse my command inward and meet, like have these two arms of it, I guess, meet with, I guess, kind of like this little, the division, so to speak, between them would be probably this cut, or this clear lane between the upper and lower portion of the map. But yeah, you know, we have the skirmishers trying to cross here, and we've got, I don't know, just kind of a continuous running skirmish in the woods. Fortunately, the majority of what they're fighting me with right now are skirmishers, who probably have hunters or something, and it's the kind of thing that formed heavy infantry shouldn't have a lot of difficulty fending off, even if they outposition me or outmaneuver me or whatever, which they will do, because they're just that much faster than I am in the woods. But there's a lot of dense terrain here, and it's very easy for me to not know where everything is, and a pretty significant portion of the latter stages of the battle is basically just hunting down the main army is engaged in a main army kind of fight, but the supporting arms, the cavalry and things like that, are involved in kind of hunting down some of the disparate bands or elements of the Confederate force that have, I don't want to say snuck, but have made their way beyond the main engagement and are harrying my rear. So I think as a play note, going forward, to play this again or whatever, is I want to try and do a better job of making sure I wrangle up as much of their force as possible so that I deal with as few of these kind of backfield stragglers as possible. Because they're just annoying. They're not really a major threat to the operation in the way that a division of infantry is or something like that. They're not really a major worry point where I'm afraid that they're going to be able to take the flag. They're just annoying. They try and go for my supply wagon, or they try and go for an exposed artillery unit or something, or they try and run around the side and see if they can't sneak over to a flag or whatever that, like historically, let's say that this is the battle happening on the ground and the army's where it is and whatnot, and like 400 random cavalrymen go and take some otherwise undefended town, but then the rest of the battlefield's a complete and total rout for the Union. Like, okay, congrats, you have that town. Who cares? But this is a game, and if any one of those objectives later on in the battle goes down, obviously it's bad for me. So, keep that in mind when you're playing here, is that, excuse me, there's a lot of map here for you to fight over, and it would be very easy to lose awareness of where the enemy was. So I have the 3rd Division coming in now from 1st Corps, and I deploy them south. Well, I deploy part of them south, and then I deploy some of 2nd Division because I see a band of Confederate artillery, and I'm thinking like, oh, I can bag me some guns early in the battle, and that'll be good for the rest of the fight, in that if I can de-gun the Confederate army at a relatively early juncture in the course of this battle, that will pay dividends down the line. And so I deviate from the plan, which is fine. It happens. Sometimes you got to be flexible and stuff, and sometimes it doesn't go well, and in this instance it goes fine, but it could have gone poorly. But I think my original plan had been to have 3rd Division down here where 33rd and 12th Infantry currently are, and then have a whole division, but I saw that opening and I was like, oh, there's 2 brigades or 2 batteries of cannon, off by themselves. Let's go ahead and get them. So right now I'm trying to push the Confederates into open territory whenever possible and bully them out of the woods. I'm trying to deal with a large skirmish unit, a large cav unit, plus General whoever up north. I think it might be Stewart, but maybe not. And I'm trying to knock out as much Confederate artillery in the middle here as I possibly can. And it's basically what I'm working on doing, is trying to establish my front line in terrain most advantageous to me where possible, and de-gun, whenever possible, de-gun the Confederate army. More than anything else, I want to get their artillery out of the equation ASAP. Everything else is secondary in my view to that. Obviously, not exposing my rear or making bad tactical plays is important, but for the most part, if we can knock out their artillery, we can really negatively affect their ability to follow through on any kind of offensive. So the map expands. You get more of your troops. It looks like just 4th Division. And so what I do here is basically I advance them into the edge of the creek so that I can have them where I want them. I collect the artillery from 4th Division into one place, and then what I do is I start mass detaching skirmishers to occupy. You see all these, I don't want to call them breastworks because they're not, but it's just a picket line basically. So occupy this picket line of, finger quotes here, defensive emplacements in the woods, and the thought process there being is that this is a battle where, reference my earlier point about catching everything or seeing everything. It's very easy for a unit of skirmishers or a unit of cav to sneak past the main line of engagement. So they're not likely to be the kind of threat that 1 or 2 or maybe 3 units of skirmishers can't send off by themselves, especially if they have the defensive bonuses associated with these emplacements. but that like a brigade, like an infantry brigade would obviously be a hard thing for them to send off, but cavalry or skirmishers on their own or something isn't that big a deal. And the thought process is I just don't want someone randomly sneaking past my shit and then taking a flag and causing the entire battle plan to go to crap. So I'm willing to sacrifice the like maybe 4,000 men it takes to hold all of those. 4,000's a lot. Like 2,000 to 3,000 men it takes to hold all of those defensive positions, and just put one in every single position so that there's someone manning every inch of the line, and then the rest of the army can go fight the real battle. Now, what that does mean is I don't have skirmishers for the most part, which is rough. But what it also means is that I am not required to leave a lot of troops back to defend, and most of them can come and go onto the attack. And it ends up paying dividends pretty quickly. Some of the skirmishers in the north and around the northmost objective near where 4th Division was almost immediately run into cavalry. And this cav unit, like, skirmishes with my infantry the rest of the battle, but never really threatens the objective. So, you know, in that regard, I think it all pays off pretty well. Anywho, main line of engagement is engaged in some forest fighting. That's a mistake on my part. I think I shouldn't be doing that, but it is what it is. I'm still, like, really trying to knock out their cannon wherever possible, or punish them for being in the open. And I'm still trying to get my front line stabilized and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I know that I still have more map to come, so I'm not mega worried about trying to kind of pull off my Anaconda plan here just yet, but I do want to, wherever possible, remove the teeth from the Confederate Army, so to speak, and then make it so that when, you know, the time comes to go on the offensive, I have such a just irrecoverable cannon advantage that the Confederate Army just can't respond, basically, and I can just blast them out from wherever. But yeah, man, so Chickamauga is actually pretty fun. I'll be honest, I was kind of dreading this map because there's a lot of forest fighting here, and it's not the kind of thing where you can really leverage the mobility of all the cavalry, or you can't leverage the superior terrain of some of the Union positions, or, you know, all that stuff. You're just kind of like, yeah, here we are. Here's the fight. Here's some cav, or here's some dudes in the wood, and here's some other dudes in the wood, and fight it out. And in those kinds of instances, because the Confederates have 3 stars and all this other stuff, like, they're actually advantaged, I would say. So you have to kind of leverage 2 units against 1, or 3 units against 1 plus artillery or something, to kind of win these skirmishes. And it does mostly go okay because their arrival is so staggered, but it's still touch and go, especially in this early phase when I don't have the ability as easily to get a concentration of force like I would like. And here I'm just, I mean, this part's not really sexy YouTube, but I'm just kind of dispersing my forces. I'm trying to collect all of this stuff to the south. I've never had the Confederates make a serious push across the south here, which, amusingly, this is where I like to attack. When I play this battle from the Confederate side, I like to attack down here, and then just roll up the Union line. Just roll it up. You know, have some, I don't want to say token force up north, but I like to have a force big enough to be a serious contender, but not enough to really kind of bring the battle to conclusion, and then attack down here in the south, and then just roll up the Union position. Now, however, there's a lot of territory you got to cover that way, so it does mean you need to be bringing, like, if you're playing this on the Confederate map, you do need to be bringing troops that are able to march like that. You know, they need to have good good endurance and that kind of thing, because you're not going to have a lot of time to rest your men up to 100%, like, would be preferable in between phases. You need to pretty much keep that offensive rolling. So keep that in mind. But from the Union perspective, what I'm doing is I am putting together as coherent a force as possible, and basically you have a division attack in echelon. So first division is the holding force, and when I can collect them, second corps, my apologies, a corps attack in echelon. When you can collect them, second corps will roll up what is now the Confederate left flank. But in the moment, it's tough to do that, and it's still touch and go. That said, I'm not really I don't feel like worried right now. I have a confident battlefield position. I feel good about where the Union is standing, all that kind of stuff. And now we've got all of our troops, and we have 2 supply wagons and all that kind of stuff. And I can work to keep the army well supplied, and more importantly, the artillery well supplied. But this is a gigantic battle, and with only 2 corps, it's actually pretty hard to keep everyone supplied and to keep a good recon net, especially when I'm dedicating so much of what could be my recon net to holding this tree line. Especially looking back on it now, I feel like there's some places where there's so much Union line infantry coverage that maybe I could afford to not have that. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about, kind of lessons learned from the campaign as a whole, and the lead up to this battle. Not that there, was much of one. There was just that one other battle. But we, I think, have been watching really since Chancellorsville this transition from very dashing movement and very aggressive movement to, I think, movement that is more heavily supported by artillery. And it's born of really a respect for the CSA's artillery branch, and a continuing realization that though some of the victories I scored in the earlier battles were dramatic and fun, they were also costly. And so we've transitioned to a safer play style as we enter into the latter stages of the mid-war. The Union Army is, I think, inarguably the equal of the Confederate. Now, I know the game version of the Confederate Army has an experiential edge. They have a lot of 3-star units, etc., so forth and so on. But earlier in the state of the campaign, I couldn't trust Union infantry to match its Confederate peers man for man on a nearly 1-for-1 basis. And now, pretty reliably, I can rely on. Well, pretty reliably now, I can. Confederate or Union infantry, Union artillery, Union cavalry, Union rifles, etc., so forth and so on, have all gotten to the point now where, it's the Confederate edge and morale and speed and willingness to engage in melee, and the fact that they have a nearly inexhaustible supply of recruits is starting to be tampered out by the lethality and the efficacy of Union artillery more than anything else, but also Union riflery. So in a lot of these battles, I'm able to leverage the terrain to my advantage, and I'm able to even trust my guys to fight favorably in forest fighting, where both units engaged are in forest cover, forest terrain, and I suspect that a portion of that is tied to the fact that we've generally been very successful in keeping their armory figure. So the stat of their army, their armory is still somewhere in the vicinity of the 50s. Their experience has climbed recently to the mid 70s, but their gear has stuck to the mid 50s, and I think that is borne out by what you see at capture at the end of this battle. So it's not CS Richmonds and 10-pound parrots. It's and you're probably seeing it here during the course of the battle too. And by the way, I'm playing it in slow-mo, not because I think I need to play this particular fight in slow-mo, although there's a lot going on that would be easy for me to forget, but because my computer starts kind of like throwing a conniption. I was experiencing, I don't want to say lag, but input stuttering and things like that. So I played it on slow-mo to give the PC a chance to catch up. Some of the animations have been very smooth in the past in smaller battles, but in this particular battle there's so much terrain that I experienced a degree of stuttering. Anyway, yeah, so I think in this battle I end up capturing a bunch of Tyler, Texas's and Springfield or Mississippi 41 rifles and, gear like that, as compared to some of the really fancy rifles you might see when the Confederate Army starts to hit I think it looks like 60% for their armory, probably. So what that ended up turning into here is that there was a qualitative edge in my equipment that covered and made up for the qualitative shortcomings of my army in regards to experience. So I had a lot of 1-star and 2-star units, and the Confederate Army was apparently composed entirely of 3-star veterans. I don't know, what other front in the war they're coming from, because they've had to build this army from the ground up like 7 times now. So they're coming from somewhere. There's some other front that I don't know about that they're doing great on. But yeah, anywho, we start pushing with the offensive portion of Second Corps. The artillery will catch up when the artillery catches up. I've got the cavalry kind of conducting a sweep of my rear, trying to wrap up any skirmishers and any cavalry. And then the main line of effort is just doing its thing. The main line of effort's just kind of keeping the Confederates bottled in and engaged, and they're in the open terrain and I'm in heavy terrain. Just trying to keep that up as much as possible. I'm trying to remove wherever I can their cavalry or their skirmishers or whatever elements of theirs have gotten into my backfield, with an eye towards attempting to box them in, basically, like collapse the front to as small an area as possible, and then if I can envelop them, great, whatever. I don't think I end up properly enveloping the Confederate position, but I do end up getting most of this Second Corps force into position in the Confederates' kind of their rear, or the angle at which they would be getting reinforcements if they were to get reinforcements. So I cut off their line of communications, so to speak. Now, obviously, in a non-video game world, these roads continue off the map to the north and so forth. So if they got behind my line and realized they were cut off or the day is lost, they could just keep riding. They could just keep going. Go north, and eventually you'll hook your way to the east and find your way back to Richmond, and then rejoin the army. Blah 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 blah. Okay, it's a video game, sure, I get it. There are edges to the map, but yeah. So let's take a look at what's going on with the offensive here. I'm trying to get elements of Second Corps online. There's this wonderful fortress to maneuver in, this block of woods to the south here, and it gives the AI cover for its movements. Okay, that's rough. But it also gives me cover for my movements, which works out well. And as long as I keep a pretty wide but well-manned front of infantry, nothing should being the operative word, squeeze through or sneak through. And whenever I make contact, I do my best to get 2-on-1 and theoretically more, like 3-on-1, 4-on-1, whatever. But I'm seeking to make contact with every possible unit, and whenever I'm not making contact, I'm pushing, and that's just basically, the operational directive for 2 Corps is advance. It's basically a recon and force, essentially. Advance until you make contact, wait for another unit, engage, fix, wait for another unit to help you run it down or outflank it and destroy it that way, and then rest as needed, and then continue to advance. Rinse, wash, repeat, basically. And there's a couple of straggler units. There's maybe, I think, 3 brigades, a battery, and a supply wagon to the south there that I end up engaging and destroying. But that's not the meat of the fighting. The meat of the fighting is my efforts to push across this small creek in the middle of the field, which amusingly is where most of the portions of the fighting on day 1 that went poorly for me were also located. So crossing that particular creek or small stream or whatever is evidently, something not bound to go well. Yeah. But you're starting to see, I think, hopefully, kind of the battle plan take shape. There is... Weirdly, I'm weak in the center, and this ends up kind of biting me in the ass because they pierce. They pierce through my middle, and admittedly, that just kind of turns them into a larger salient that I can slap from both sides, like a pair of hands slapping on a mosquito or something, and that's basically exactly what happens. But they pierce my center, not in the manner of like breaking all the troops that are there or anything like that. They just take one brigade, and there's like 2 units of skirmishers and a brigade standing in front of them in this little small spoke in the center, and I've got nothing else there supporting them. It's just sort of flanker fire. And they're able to create this very narrow offensive thrust through 33rd Infantry's position. He has to keep giving ground because they keep threatening melee. And what I'm trying to do is give them a position that they can overcommit to pushing into, and then I can sort of smash them from 2 sides. That plan goes a little awry in that it's too effective on their end. So I was not expecting them to push as hard as they did or commit as hard as they do to that attack. So I mean, it ends up working out, but it was a very aggressive push on their end, and frankly, that's maybe not what I would have done in their shoes. But I get kind of like, oh, we're finally making some headway. Let's go ahead and utilize it, I guess. Otherwise, though, the efforts in my backfield to wrap up everything are still going mostly okay. The Second Corps is still mostly coming online. There's units that need to be engaged and whatnot. And whenever we can, we're fighting for this farmhouse on the northern Confederate held objective. I don't know which one it is. Kelly's Field, probably. There's a lot of their troops all kind of wavering, but on that like almost but not quite shattered or routed point, and they stay there for a while, and I don't get really any kind of like decisive fire or decisive action, unfortunately, but it is what it is. We engage them and we just grind them down, and I'm able to bring more and more forces online as I free up the 2 or 3 brigades and the 1 unit of skirmishers that was hunting down their cavalry. Now that's all free, and I'm able to push and join them, but their position is becoming more and more tenuous as their front line begins to continue looking like kind of a teardrop, or like a teardrop, basically a salient. We get, I start marching some of the troops that are behind the line, finger quotes, down here on the southern second course push. I start marching them up the road to kind of join the offensive. I cross the river. I pull into this little island. And basically it's an island, like tree fortress almost. It's basically just finding sections of the map and then claiming them and then, rinse, wash, repeat over and over and over again. And that's the battle plan for this fight. So some of the lessons that I learned at Gettysburg or Chancellorsville don't apply as much when the Confederate Army doesn't have much in the way of really high-end guns, like respecting their artillery and all that. But it's still good practice. It's still probably best practice. It's just that some of the teeth of their offensive ability has been lessened. I wouldn't say removed or negated, but lessened. So yeah, anyway. I don't know. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen in the lead up to Cold Harbor. We get another step of phase 2. Like, I don't really know what exactly the break in the day was. As far as I can tell, they don't get any reinforcements. And I have that unit of skirmishers to the south on that recon point to make sure that my back door, I'm at least aware of if there's going to be troops moving on my position. But for the most part, it doesn't really look like it. So, they give me the warning about like, hey, there's more stuff coming. And I'm over here like, okay. Like, sure, like if it gets here, cool, I guess. Let me know, But until then, whatever. So this unit right here, Manigault, they took so many dudes to get them to eventually surrender. It's wild the lengths that you need to go to get people in this war to surrender versus dying needlessly, which I don't think is historically accurate. I think, troops on both sides struck their colors with more regularity than you see in this game. But, hey, whatever. It is what it is. So you're seeing now kind of a little bit of their press through my position, through 33rd's position, and how thin my line is at that point. And I'm very nervous about, I'm watching this video and I'm like, God, man, what were you thinking? But I remember in the moment when I'm playing the battle, I was very like, yeah, this is going pretty well. Or better than I expected it to, honestly. And I don't want to say I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm looking at how thin my front line is. And I guess the only part that I thought was going okay about that was if they advance into that space, great. What does that get them? It's the kind of the thought process I've got where, what does that really do for them if they move into that area and they take it from me? And so I'm over here like, okay, have it, good for you. And there was a lot of that kind of mentality in the battle where the Confederates would make a push towards some terrain, like I was saying at the beginning of the battle, where you're fighting over that bridge crossing with a unit of skirmishers and cavalry and infantry and artillery, and that's it. And they've got 3 brigades and cannon. I could probably slow that down, sure, but why? Why? I don't get to keep any of it. So what does it matter? I just collapsed everything down into a unified command, and I fought off attackers from all sides, and that's not ideal either. I'd love to be able to keep a line of supply to my rear, but hey, whatever. I'll take what I can get. Yeah. So they've got a really heavy thrust going on in the middle there, as you can see. And 5 on the screen, and I'm nearly certain there's a 6th that I cannot currently see in that line of theirs that's advancing. And it's just the strangest behavior pattern, because they're advancing in this line, and there's a bunch of them attacking one brigade, and it's just kind of like, why? Why? I'm not complaining. I love it. Feel free. Continue to attack this one brigade, and I'll just keep falling back and giving ground and falling back and giving ground. Meanwhile, I'll crush the rest of your army. But why? why not man the flags and start working your way towards a different flag? Why not? I don't know. I mean, it's the AI. I'm sure they see a threat and they're like, we need to remove this one threat. I'm like, okay, sure, man, do your thing. But it's just strange. My Cav swarm, so I've got for my Cav division, an entire division of cavalry charges this one brigade of their infantry. Not sure that was the best use of the Cav, but it was fun. I kind of use them as a big brute squad. It's not probably ideal. This battle was really fun. Like, it's a very different kind of fight than you usually see. Where, I mean, at the same time, it's kind of not. Like, it is and it's not, right? So it's still all about maintaining control over certain pieces of terrain and blah, 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 like all that kind of stuff. But normally, you look at these, like, blocks of woods or blocks of trees or whatever as sort of like islands, and essentially, I'm basically island hopping around the map. Not obvious, not literally. It's not Pacific. It's not the Pacific in World War II, and I'm not the Marines. Or MacArthur's 25th Corps, I think, right? Anyway, MacArthur's portion of the Army, and then the Navy in the Pacific. I'm not that. But in terms of the thought process of advance to control, and then advance to contest, engage and destroy, and then establish control of a block of woods, and then consolidate your gains. Advance the artillery, rest your troops, so forth and so on. And then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. And if the Confederates attack, defend, and that kind of thing. Like, in a lot of these battles, like, take, for example, Gettysburg. Gettysburg was all about, maneuvering to control and then blunting the offensive of a piece of terrain, a hill or a forest or both, and that kind of shit. And so that general concept is at play too here, where control of key defensive terrain is vital. But the battlefield is so densely populated with defensive terrain that it's very possible, as you're seeing in my center, to fight almost all of the, well, not all of the fight, but like a lot of the fight in defensive terrain. This is basically a prelude to the Wilderness Campaign, in terms of the battlefield anatomy and all that kind of stuff. And I do apologize because I had mentioned that I wanted to kind of intersperse the commentary with these videos about what I'm doing in the game with the actual battle. And the only time I went to Chickamauga, I was like 22. I was, young, and I was still in college, and I'm years older now, and I don't think that I appreciated it as much. Like, it was beautiful, but it was also hard to perceive the lines of battle and the maneuver and everything going on in that engagement. But looking at this map now, and again, I don't know how accurate these maps are to the real life, maps of the engagements and whatnot. But if this is even remotely close to what the battle must have been like in the actual battle, good God, this must have been horrendous terrain to fight in, to maneuver armies upon, to try and coordinate the movements of your troops. I wouldn't be surprised if when I get done recording this video, I go and read about the battle, and a significant portion of it ends up being basically multiple bodies of troops had a decent plan for an engagement, but because of terrain difficulties, the timing of attack A got off poorly to the timing of attack B, and so forth and so on. And you probably also saw a lot of like very close, like bodies of troops stumbling across each other. And I don't know. I hope I'm wrong, but one of the things that we don't appreciate when we have these games where your brigades respond perfectly to your orders and everything like that, like, and you have a great perception of this because we're in this Goodyear blimp a mile and a half or 2 miles above the battlefield. I get the impression that maneuvering armies in this terrain would likely have been a nightmare. And coordinating the movement, or you could lose an entire division and you wouldn't know until it was too late. Like, especially what if the rider gets lost? What if you're Rosecrans and you send an order to the colonel of the brigade, the division commander of some division, whatever, General such and such. I have solid recon suggesting that the Confederate 3rd Division under this guy is, rounding on your position, and you're outnumbered, and someone's on your left flank, and you need to get out of there and pull back, and we'll reinforce and meet you at this place. And what if your rider gets lost? Like in this game, they all just get a telegraph from me instantly, or they I call them on their cell phone, and I'm like, "Yo, dude," I text them, and they back off. But in the, I don't think that it worked that way. Like, someone needs to send them a letter or whatever, and it's just, oh man, like it's. If I can find it, I want to get Scourge of War at Gettysburg. And I might do the Waterloo game. I'm like, the Napoleonic Wars are interesting and fascinating too. I don't know them as well. I've only really read the Sharps Rifles books about the conflict, and then of course just general histories about the conflict, but not in the same kind of detail that I've studied the Civil War. But I mean, mostly it's the same. You don't have the same level of industrialization occurring during the war and all that kind of stuff, but you do still have a lot of the same general, a musket's more or less a musket. How you utilize a musket's more or less the same, blah, blah, blah. And I do know that, so I listened to this podcast about the Civil War, and I'm way behind Chickamauga in it. I'm still listening about First Manassas, but in it they talk about how Jackson uses the exact same reverse slope defensive positioning technique that Wellington used in the Peninsula Campaign. So now I'm way off topic. Sorry, if you've watched this series this long, I do this. So evidently Stonewall Jackson was a student of history. Anybody coming out of the military academy in this era would likely have been aware of the things that did not work out of the Napoleonic Wars, some 60 years before. That's 1863. It was like 1805. So yeah, like 60-ish years before. The Peninsular Campaign was really like 1808 to 1810, somewhere in there. And it ranged all the way from Portugal till eventually you got to, and I want to say Salamanca, but I don't think that's the right battle. I think that's much earlier. But there's some battle in the, on the foot of the Pyrenees, the mountains between, God, I don't know if that's right either. The mountain range between Spain and France, which may be the Pyrenees. That sounds right, but oh boy, it's been a long time since I've looked. There's a battle there that essentially kicks the French out of Spain. That is the last battle of the Peninsula Campaign. Anyway, so Wellington was a big fan of hiding his guys not hiding, but positioning them on the other side of a hill, so that, let's say I have a cannon and I'm shooting at them, the hill absorbs nearly all of the fire. And then Jackson went a step further, and I have no reason to believe that this didn't also happen there during the Napoleonic Wars, but I didn't hear about it, where he'd have the guys like lie down or kneel or something on their side of the hill, and then reload and stand up and shoot and then kneel again. And so there's obviously like a couple of seconds while you're standing up and aiming and getting ready to shoot where, theoretically speaking, you might be exposed to fire, but otherwise you're mostly impervious. Brilliant stuff. It's great, like, tactical use of the terrain kind of things, and it's the sort of thing that I'm given to believe made Jackson as good as he was, and that kind of thing. So, anywho, Scourge of War, Gettysburg or Waterloo, as the case might be. My understanding is in that game you actually have to send orders, like they go from you via messenger to the unit commander, blah 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 blah. So there's delay between when you send the orders and when they actually get there. And it may be a significant portion that might play into the sort of clumsiness of how armies maneuvered in this era, is that delay in reaction between the change in a battlefield situation and their reactive positioning to it. Anywho, some really cool stuff in that game. I want to check it out. We're wrapping up the battlefield portion of the Chickamauga video, so I'm sorry I got rapidly off topic, but really at the end there it was just cleanup. Yeah, so there's the victory, bingo bango. Before medicine, it looks like 8,000, give or take. After medicine, sorry, like 8 or 9,000 somewhere in their Union for, I should do the math off screen at some point in time, but like 45-ish Confederate. Pretty good kill loss ratio, and some of the individual units got reamed, and then a lot of them were barely scratched, which is unfortunate. I talked about earlier trying to more evenly distribute the losses, but I just fail at it here, and First Corps just gets it worse than the other one. A depressingly large number of officer casualties, but at the same time, lots of good promotions. So here we go. 1841 Mississippi's, and I think Tyler Texas's, and a handful of Enfield carbines. Like, the weapons I'm getting from the Confederates are bad for this era. But look at all those supplies. Look at all those supplies. Woo, it's good stuff. So yeah, I think that I'm just continuing to hammer their armory, and like what they're able to fight with me with is just the scraps, the bottom of the barrel. That's, the game's maybe modeling the difficulties that they're having with keeping their logistics up or something. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's interesting because between when I played this and when I recorded this audio, I went and I've watched something Compass's playthrough, and his enemy is much smaller because his army is much smaller, but they're very well equipped, and it's just strange to look at the differentiation. I don't kind of, it's fascinating, but we got some cool stuff available for reputation rewards in the lead up to the Cold Harbor campaign. I'd like to buy both of those rifle sets, the 61s and 63s, and start cycling the 1855s out of inventory. But that's going to be hard because I have a limited number of Harper's Ferries, and basically I have to trickle them down from one unit to the next to replace losses because I don't have any I can buy from the store. So, it is what it is. I'll figure it out. But it's whatever. Well, I'll manage. Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, the Army didn't really get hurt that bad, and I think we're ready to go into Cold Harbor's campaign. I mean, financially speaking, I'm doing great. Numbers wise, I'm doing great. They were at 55 to 60. They're now at 47 to 52. Their leadership and armory have, however, both grown. So we should start seeing CS Richmonds probably start trickling back into their inventory, and we'll just kind of figure it out from there. But without further ado, we're going to jump into the campaign leading up to Cold Harbor here in a little bit. And this is Fiasco. I hope you guys had a great time. I really enjoyed Chickamauga more than I was expecting to. It is a fun battle. So I look forward to hearing about your adventures at Chickamauga, and I can't wait for Cold Mountain. And we're closing on the end of the war, guys. This is pretty exciting stuff. So I will see you next time. Fiasco, signing out.